Imagine a dark, cold stone cell. Winter's chill is still trapped in the walls, even as spring warms the world outside. A 19-year-old girl sits chained to a wooden block, iron shackles biting into her ankles. 5 English soldiers watch her every move, their eyes never leaving her, their mouths never stopping. They call her witch, heretic, whore. They remind her she is alone, abandoned by the very king she crowned. Just 2 years earlier, this girl, Joan of Arc, was the savior of France, a peasant who heard voices from God and led armies to impossible victories. She broke the English siege at Orleans and stood beside Charles VII at his coronation, turning the tide of the 100 Years' War through sheer force of will. Now, she was a prisoner, sold to the English for 10,000 francs like livestock at market. They brought her to Rouen, the heart of their occupied territory, and locked her away. Their goal wasn't just to kill her, it was to destroy what she represented. They needed to prove that her victories weren't from God, but from the devil. They would kill her body, but first, they had to condemn her soul. The trial began on February 21, 1431. 42 clerics, led by Bishop Pierre Cauchon, a man whose loyalty was to the English, not to justice, sat in judgment. Joan, still in chains, swore to answer truthfully, but with one exception: she would reveal nothing that could harm her king or her country. To the court, this was defiance. To Joan, it was loyalty. For nearly a month, they interrogated her relentlessly, trying to trap her in a contradiction. They obsessed over 3 things: her visions, her clothes, and her faith. Were her visions of Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret, and the Archangel Michael from God, or from demons? How could a simple peasant girl claim to receive divine messages? And why did she wear men's clothing? Didn't she know the Bible condemned it? Wasn't this proof of her unnatural character? Finally, why wouldn't she submit her visions to the judgment of the church, to these so-called learned men? The questions came like blows, designed to break her spirit. But Joan answered with a composure that stunned her accusers. When they asked if she believed she was in a state of grace, a classic theological trap, as no one can be certain of their salvation, she gave an answer that would impress a master theologian. "If I am not," she said, "may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there." It was a perfect response. Humble, faithful, and impossible to use against her, some of the judges began to have doubts. One resigned in protest, and another was even imprisoned for questioning the trial's legitimacy. But it didn't matter. The English had paid too much money and had too much at stake to let her go free. The conditions of her imprisonment were a sham. An ecclesiastical court was trying her, which meant she should have been held in a church prison, guarded by women. Instead, she was in a military fortress, chained like a common criminal, surrounded by enemy soldiers who hated her. She lived in constant fear, not just of execution, but of assault. One high-ranking English lord even tried to attack her in her cell. This was why she insisted on wearing men's clothes. Breeches and a tunic were much harder for someone to rip off than a dress. It was a practical defense, a small shield in a place where she was never safe. But when she explained this to the court, they dismissed it. Her reality as a vulnerable young woman meant nothing compared to their determination to paint her as a heretic. The trial itself was a legal farce. Joan was interrogated for weeks before formal charges were even filed. She was denied a lawyer. The entire process was filled with irregularities, and the transcripts were later proven to have been falsified, her words twisted to sound more incriminating. The verdict was decided before the first question was ever asked. On May 23rd, the tribunal announced its judgment. Joan's voices were declared demonic, her clothing was wicked. Her refusal to blindly submit to their authority proved her heresy. She had a choice: recant or burn. The next day, they took her to a cemetery and tied her to a stake. Weak from months in prison, abandoned by her king, and facing one of the most agonizing deaths imaginable, Joan broke. She signed an abjuration, a confession that her visions were false. She marked it with an X, as she couldn't write. This saved her from the fire but condemned her to life in prison. The court ordered her to wear a dress from that moment on. For 4 days, she complied. She wore the dress and tried to accept her fate. Then, her guards stole it. We don't know if it was a deliberate trap or just simple cruelty, but the result was the same. Left with only her old men's clothing, she put them on. It was partly out of necessity, but also because she realized her confession was a lie. Saving her life by denying her truth was its own kind of death. When the guards saw her, they reported it immediately. The tribunal reconvened with grim satisfaction. Joan had relapsed into heresy. Under their laws, there were no second chances. The sentence was death. When they questioned her one last time, she told them the truth. She put the clothes back on for protection. And because her voices had returned, telling her she had betrayed God by lying, she could not deny her truth, even if it cost her everything. The morning of May 30th, 1431, dawned clear and warm. They led her through the streets of Rouen to the old marketplace, where a massive crowd had gathered. A tall stake stood waiting, surrounded by wood arranged to burn slowly. The English wanted this to be a spectacle. Joan asked for a cross. An English soldier, moved by a flicker of pity, quickly fashioned one from two sticks and gave it to her. A priest brought a crucifix from a nearby church. She clutched them both as they tied her to the stake. As they lit the fire, Joan prayed aloud. Her voice, clear and strong, carried across the square. She called on her saints. She proclaimed her visions were real. She forgave her accusers. And as the flames rose and the smoke filled her lungs, her last audible word was Jesus. The English burned her body 3 times to ensure nothing remained but ash, which they scattered in the Seine River. They wanted to erase her, to prevent any shrine from being built, any memory from taking root, but they failed. Her death created the very martyr they had tried to prevent. Her story of faith and courage spread like wildfire. 25 years later, at the request of Joan's mother, a new trial was held. After hearing from over 100 witnesses, the court overturned the original verdict. Joan of Arc was not a heretic. She was a faithful woman, murdered for political convenience by men who cared more for power than for truth. Nearly 500 years later, in 1920, the Catholic Church canonized her as a saint. The trial was never about heresy. It was about an empire terrified of a peasant girl whose faith had shattered their plans. They killed her for wearing men's clothing while ignoring why she needed to. They called her a heretic for believing in God. And when she stood before them, alone and chained, her faith was so strong it made even her judges question their own. They burned her body, but the flames only illuminated the corruption of her accusers. Her death was her final victory. She died condemned as a heretic, but is remembered as a saint. And the men who killed her are remembered only for their crime. Thank you for watching. If you found this story as powerful as I do, please like this video and subscribe for more chapters from history.